Hi there.
Hello there. So I have to make you a door. So thanks a lot, Ellen, for your time to be here
Sure.
with us.
I'm very grateful.
So we'll get started very soon. We'll get started with our mantra and then we'll get into the session.
Very good.
Om Sahna Bhavatu Sahnau Bhunaktu Sah Viryam Karvavahai Tejashvina Vadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti 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 Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. So, hello, welcome everyone for joining us today with Alan Annand. And we are very excited to host Alan today. And Alan will be speaking for the second time in Ashravidya Gurukulam. So a lot of excitement, and the topic is also something which is really close to heart to the Alan as well, because this topic is, and we'll get into a lot into especially the marriage, Venus, relationship, creativity, harmony, and all those topics which you are hearing what's going on in the Jyotish Mela, as well as a beautiful book which has came from Ellen on that one. That would like to just share my screen to get started some part of it. So here we are. Okay, just make sure it's not in our way. Just hiding it. Okay, so the people who do not know us, very briefly about ourselves, we say ourselves Arshi Jyotish organization, and in terms of our URL to go through, it's jyotish.com, and we have been in existence from last 30 years, while in terms of our online presence has started in 2020. Somehow it happened to be one of the good time because the online presence and the people has given and supported us very well during this time. Jyotish Mela, a conference which is what we are known a lot for and been there for last 30 years. And we have many faces of the astrology, many famous faces of the astrology has always been showed up on our platform. So very proud of that achievement. Rakesh Sharma has been the drive who has brought us to this level. Mm, Everything started with the blessing of Puja Dayanand Saraswati ji. And that's our association with Ashravidya Gurukulam. So we are following the tradition, and our Jyotish conference always happen every year in person in Ashravidya Gurukulam, except the times when it was pandemic and we could not run it over there. It's a just one word about Ashravidya. It's a Vedanta center, great place, uh, ashram in USA with the modern amenities. So you can see what's coming. So very briefly, would like to talk about our. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about this. So I will keep my video off, Alan, for a minute.
Sure.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So with that, we are want now to talk about our Jyotish Mela. So Jyotish Mela, it's an opportunity where you will get a deep dive into a multiple topics. Which we are also getting today into this. It's like the marriage, love life, timing, turbulence, a lot about the topics of consultation. So most of the time these are the questions which comes in our consultation and that affects people in their better half a lot. So we will be getting into those, and the timing for the of this conference is going from the Thursday, 1st June till Sunday 11th June is the time frame. All 11 days we'll be deep dive into a lot of topics of this one. And as you can see, the pictures in the background is like all our speakers faces. You are seeing around 20 plus speakers will be going to be in the background. So with that, we would like to move into and talk about Ellen here. So speaking about Ellen is we heard a lot about Ellen from multiple folks, like, so Ronnie, Penny. So he has been learning astrology from Hart Defoe and has an experience of consulting and teaching Vedic astrology from last 30 years. He is a graduate of British Faculty of Astrological Studies and served as a faculty in North America and for multiple years and been a student across. He talks about, so humble to say that the student, but he has been teaching, learning, also being a writer into a different field before getting into a Vedic astrology writer. And he has also been learning, I will say, Jyotish as well as the palmistry, two sciences. So I will just also make sure that some of you just keep yourself muted, that otherwise it disturbs the conversation. And so we will be getting a deep dive into the, I will say, the early years and the early life of Alan. We will also be getting to know his books. So let's go further a bit more. Yeah. So these are the points I was talking about. We will be looking into the Alan's early life, the career, and how, the study of this divine sciences, what kind of recommendation he has for the people who are like inspired to be one of the Vedic astrologers in the future. Some of the good books which you see in the background is what has previously been written by Alan in the area of Vedic astrology. So there are other books too also to be referred to, but they are into different field, but in terms of astrology, if I am not mistaken. And we are also here to talk about a special book which recently came into the market, and also it's quite relevant to the topic of the conference. We'll also be touching upon on some of the topics which Ellen is going to take into our conference, and just understanding how relevant it is to for the people to be able to gain from the Jyotish Mela. So this is the book which I am referring to, and since we are getting a deep dive into, so I'm not talking a lot about it, but this particular book is available on the Amazon and also on the website of Alan. It is called navamsha.com. So if I'm not mistaken, Alan, that is right, Navamsha?
Yes, that's correct. Although to purchase the book, you need to go to Amazon.
Okay, got it. So that's where we are. So we will be looking into this and few of the topics. So with that, why don't we get started to know more, and I will remove the presentation out of the way and then start to have conversation with Ellen over here. So Ellen, when we are getting started, let me just make sure one part is like removing this stop sharing from my side and keep you as a spotlight over here for everyone. And so we are trying to know more about you, Ellen. So one question comes in the people's mind always about how did you get started to know about Vedic astrology? What inspired you, especially seeing your background into a completely different field before you came into Vedic astrology? So what was the drive behind coming into this direction, and especially giving the grace of the so much of like deep dive you did it in this subject?
Okay, well, I have to think there's something karmic about all this because, my last name is Anand, which is so familiar to people from the Indian continent, of course. But, this is not an adopted name. This is my natural name. When I was studying Jyotish with Hart Defoe and, many students in California, people were always saying to me, like, what's your real name? Or did your guru give you that name? And I always had to say, well, no, it's mine, and it's courtesy of my father, my grandfather, and my great grandfather. My ancestors are Scottish, and there's a place called Annandale, right on the border of England and Scotland. So I come by my name, you know, um, naturally. But it's just such an amazing coincidence that I became so drawn to Jyotish, and I ended up, communing in this world. But to as to how I came to Jyotish, well, I started studying astrology on my own, just Western astrology back in I don't want to date myself, but let's say late 70s. And after studying a while on my own, I realized I wasn't getting very far. So I looked around for formal instruction of the day. And at that time, there was the American Federation of Astrologers, National Council of Geocosmic Research, and the British Faculty of Astrological Studies. Well, I'll call it a bit of a Commonwealth hangover, I guess. I felt a loyalty to England, perhaps. And so I looked at their program, and it was really, really very, very, very thorough. I thought of it as a kind of a boot camp for Western astrologers. So I embarked upon that, which was basically intended to be 2 or 3 years of correspondence studies. And I did 2 years of that. And then I went to England for 1 year, kind of to accelerate everything, weekly meetings with my tutor. And I wrote, 16 hours worth of exams at the end of all that to get my diploma from the British Faculty of Astrological Studies. I moved back to Canada, then settled in Montreal for the first time, and basically plugged into a local astrological community, and found out at that point that I was pretty much the most educated person in Western astrology, in terms of a formal education at that time. So people said, well, you should teach classes. So I began immediately to teach a beginners and an intermediate class, and with another fellow Montreal resident, we formed the Astrological Society of Montreal. I later went on to be their president for several years. So for years, I'm going to say 5, 7, 10 years, whatever, I gave consultations, of course, because that's where you really, generate your experience. But I also taught classes at a beginner's, intermediate, and advanced level in Western astrology, strictly for all those years. Meanwhile, while I'm practicing, astrology to the best of my abilities, and seeing more and more clients, and people come on board with all kinds of questions. When will I get married? Will I inherit money from my parents? What career is right for me? Should I relocate? All this sort of meat and potato stuff that is not fuzzy wuzzy abstract stuff. It's real stuff. Will I have children and when, and stuff like that. Well, try as I would using the techniques of Western astrology, I was increasingly frustrated that I felt that I was not, as they say, getting traction on this topic, and in this subject area. And I thought, well, Western astrology seems really good in terms of, delineating character, personality, relationships stuff, career orientation. But I was not finding I was doing a very good job at predicting. And yet, this is the whole premise of astrology. It's why people come to astrologers, not for a feel-good talk about, how bright they are or how wealthy they might become. They want to know, like, how do I do it? And when will it happen? That's the big thing. So I was kind of frustrated. I used up my entire toolkit of Western astrology techniques and not knowing where to turn. And I was becoming a little bit cynical about, astrology. Lo and behold, around that time, I had a birthday, and a girlfriend of the day gave me a book, James Braha's book, Ancient Hindu Astrology for the Modern Western Astrologer. Now, I look back on that book now, and I don't think it's as wonderful as I thought it was at the time, but it sparked my interest very much so. And I thought, wow, this is a whole other system. And so I prepared my chart, in the sidereal zodiac, and whoa, I almost stopped right there because I mean, I think many astrologers might have this reaction. You're used to seeing your chart in the tropical zodiac. You have certain, understanding affinities for certain things. I had a lot of fire planets and fire signs in my Western chart. And once you convert to sidereal, of course, you drop backwards by almost one whole sign. So some of my key planets and placements moved into water signs, and I thought, oh, I'm not sure if I like this. But I almost threw the book away on the spot, but I did persevere with it. And I thought, as I read more and more about it, this seems to work. It makes sense. So I went out then into every bookstore in Montreal. There were 4 in the day, esoteric bookstores, and I bought all the Vedic astrology books I could find, 6, as I recall. And I devoured those, and I, acquired some basic knowledge. And then within a year, I went to a conference given by the American College of Vedic Astrologers in Sedona. Not in Sedona, in San Diego it was at the time. And I met a whole lot of people and who said, oh, you're Canadian. You must know Hart Defoe. I said, no, never heard of him. Well, he's an amazing, amazing teacher and consultant, whatever. You need to find him. So when I got back to Montreal, I came home with a suitcase full of books and software for, professional software for Vedic astrology. And I then sought out Hart Defoe. And upon first contact, his wife, who's a sort of a gatekeeper for his business, she said, Hart's not doing clients anymore. And I wrote back again. I said, well, I insist. I've been doing Western astrology for 10 or 15 years or whatever. I'm seriously thinking of converting over to Jyotish. I would like to see how it's professionally done. Please see me. So he relented, said, okay, come and see me. So I took the train to Toronto, went for a consultation, was suitably impressed, and said, if you ever give courses, please let me know. So within 3-4 months or whatever, got an email saying I'm giving a weekend seminar on relationship compatibility in Toronto. So I went to Toronto for the weekend, absorbed that course, and then agreed, wow, this guy is an amazing teacher. And so I said, again, if you teach anything more substantive, let me know. A year went by, got an email. Hart is now teaching full-blown courses of 6 weeks duration in Albuquerque, New Mexico, teaching out of Dr. Ladd's Ayurvedic Institute. So I took a vacation time and a leave of absence from my full-time job with Canadian Railway, and I went to Albuquerque for 6 weeks and took the first of many courses with Hart Defoe, the intermediate course and then the advanced course, and then a whole bunch of specialty courses over the 10 years following, and then became so thoroughly absorbed in Jyotish that I've never looked back at Western astrology, and in fact, never looked back at where the planets are in the tropical zodiac. And if you ask me today where Uranus and Neptune and Pluto are, I really can't answer you because I don't pay attention anymore. But I'm thoroughly absorbed in Vedic astrology, and it's now been since the mid-90s that I've been into Vedic astrology. So we're now talking about 25 years plus, deeply immersed in it thus far. So gosh, that was a long answer to a short question.
No,
feel free to pull me back.
No, thanks a lot for such a beautiful answer, because that's exactly what, otherwise I would have the follow-up questions like, how it is coming, how it got started. So it was really nice to know how, and I will say, we have studied from the penny pharaoh, so we understand that
Yes.
tradition is what you are talking about, and how important it is to understand the knowledge of Vedic astrology going systematically, uh, one after another. Then only it works, and you can see the pattern, how you are moving forward, like repeating also. And also you talked about like the in-person sessions which you are emphasizing, and being together, that has its own importance. So thanks a lot for being able to tell us how you got started, and that's also a reason how fast you moved in the direction. So another question which is coming is, when it comes to consultation, do you, what is your approach in consultation? Like, mm, what do you think should be the best steps? Like, what should be the steps which you should be following for the client so that they get the best possible guidance? Is like, as you talked about, they are not just for chit chat, they do want to know some real stuff.
Yes.
So what's your approach?
Well, when a client or potential client first contacts me, I always, make sure that they get accurate birth data, not just mom's memory, but try to find the hospital birth certificate because I really want to have an accurate birth chart. Every astrologer does, but as you know, in Vedic astrology, because of the harmonic charts, the divisional charts, the Amshas, Vargas, which are very time sensitive, we want to really get an accurate chart as much as is possible without having to do rectification. And I'll always ask the client as well, what are you interested in? Why are you coming to me? Is it just curiosity, or is there something that you got to know, like something about relationships, career, health, spirituality, financial investments, whatever? Because I want to have time to think about that before I see the client, before they show up. So we do all this on the phone or internet or whatever. In the good old days, I say that, when people would come in person routinely, I would have, all that and be prepared, have the chart fully analyzed, their particular issues, concerns, questions. I would have thought about that, have my considerations prepared to answer everything that I think that they're coming with. In the old days, they would come and I would always look at their hands as well too, because ever since I learned palmistry, again from Hart Defoe, the week I learned palmistry from Hart Defoe in California, I came back to Montreal where I was living at the time, and I started using palmistry on my next astrology client that next week. I put it to work right away, and I have done it unfailingly ever since then. Sometimes I ask people at the end of a consultation, so, how was that for you? And they say, wow, it was really good. And the palmistry part was like really amazing. And it's kind of funny. I want to choke them at that time because I still think of myself as a kind of an amateur palmist and more of a professional astrologer. But I know there's something about palmistry that is so immediate for people. And so unfailingly, I always spend a half an hour on palmistry with every client. And that's in person. And of course, in modern times now, when we do so much remotely, I get the client to send me photos of their hands. And now, of course, everybody's got a phone that takes beautiful pictures. So it's so easy to get good quality photos of the hands. And I study those before I see the client. And I spend that first half hour of the consultation talking about palmistry. And then, many times we'll refer back to it in the course of a consultation. But in terms of the astrology, I analyze the chart fully and completely in a standard way, looking at the avastas of all the grahas, knowing strengths, weaknesses, positive and negative placements by houses, really go thoroughly through everything in the chart vis-a-vis yogas, major yogas, minor yogas, consider those. And then within a yoga, there's Chandra Mangala and there's Chandra Mangala. You can have a very ordinary one in Gemini. You can have a very powerful one with Moon in Taurus and Mars in Scorpio, where the two participants are very strong. That Chandra Mangala yoga is very different from one where both planets are in, let's say, Gemini, which is creates no strength or weakness for either one. So this is a very important thing that's been drilled, into all of us who studied with Hart. The avastas are exceedingly important, and they, qualify yogas for strength or weakness. And then when you come to discuss dashas and bhuktis, you have a sense of magnitude, whether, that particular yoga will manifest in that time and with what consequence, positive or negative, and also with what magnitude in terms of you're going to win some money. Well, is it a little money like $100, or is it big money like $100,000? These are things that come into play. So that's all part of an initial consultation and what we call graha vichara, the analysis of the planets. Yoga Vichara, the analysis of yogas, Bhava Vichara, which is the analysis of each of the houses, and Dasha Bhukti Vichara, which is, creating an expectation for what will happen in these planetary periods. That's all, standard stuff for a client on first acquaintance. After, years in the business, you start getting repeat clients, of course, a lot. I mean, some every year, or some every, 3, 4, 5, 7 years, whatever the case may be. I never hustle people, to say you got to see me every year or anything like that. Life is not like that. You come back and see me when you're at a crossroads and you need a consultation because you need a perspective that's outside your own head. Then I will get into different things. I'll review the natal chart and everything that's in it. I'll update myself on the dashas and bhuktis. Then I might very well dip into the amshas, look at the amshas, vargas, to see what is being animated during this current dasha and bhukti. I will, of course, then use Varshaphala as well too, the birthday chart for that particular year. And of course, well, throughout I will use prashna, whether for a consultation. Every time I do a consultation, I use the launch minute of that consultation as a kind of a prashna. In case questions arise spontaneously within that session, I will refer to that prashna, sort of stepping outside of the natal chart, because some questions are hard to ask. Should I go out on this date with this mystery person who's been stalking me for 3 months? Should I or should I not? Well, rather than look at the natal chart for that, maybe I prefer a prashna to address that. It's sort of a silly example, but whatever the question might be, sometimes it's easier to get outside the natal chart and look at a prashna instead. So I'll use that routinely. And then other considerations, sometimes people come forward with health issues, and I'll look at the chart entirely from a dosha point of view. There's a protocol for reading the chart from an Ayurvedic point of view and see what's animating or troubling the person at the time. So all kinds of techniques come into play. But I'm often going back and forth between, see, I said this and that and the other thing about, your astrological chart. But let me remind you what I said an hour ago about your hand, how you've got this, immense little finger, a really long headline, and a long Jupiter finger. You're meant to be a teacher, a communicator, a writer, or whatever. So go ahead and get your PhD, because, the field of academia is good for you. I'll constantly come back and refer to the hand because, it's all part of us, and it's such a rich sort of methodology that I can't ignore it. And really, they're beautiful to operate together. I think this is one of the differences between Jyotishis and Western astrologers. Western astrologers are kind of, I'll use the phrase, a one-trick pony, meaning they know astrology, but they don't bring other things into it. Whereas Vedic astrologers are more conditioned or educated to have other things on board. They know a bit of, numerology. They know some nimitta. They know some Ayurveda. They can bring up stories of myths of some kind that sort of, shed some light on a condition that the client is going through. And I think it's a more holistic approach that serves us well to see perspectives from many different points of view.
Lovely, lovely, Alan. I think you also answered a question about which I wanted to ask you. How does the hand reading and the palmistry helps you in terms of, does it increase the chances of the prediction, or it's just reconfirm or confluence your prediction? So do you want to add something to that? Is that it always helps?
I'll say just this, I said earlier, I consider myself a kind of a amateur palmist, even though I've been doing it now for 20 years. I use the hand more for character assessment, career orientation, health prognosis. As far as the predictive value of the hand, I'm less likely to do that. It's more of it's positioned at the first of a consultation. It's more of a get acquainted with the person and get a sense of the physical self, the personality, and the character of the individual. But when questions arise in the context of a palmistry discussion about the timing of something or whether, I will usually defer that and say, let's talk about that in the astrological component, to which I dedicate an hour. My typical consultation is 90 minutes plus. half-hour palmistry and an hour solid on astrology. And that's where I feel, it's a personal thing, more comfort in terms of using dasha, bhukti, and gochara to delineate what I think is going to happen about this, that, or the other topic, career, relationship, health, in the context of the astrology.
Lovely to hear that. So during this time, one more question arises into my mind is, do you like to say something about a particular reading when you were doing and it was difficult for you to go through and you utilized other techniques as well? Do you have something which you would like to pull upon and would like to talk to us?
Okay, I can give you an example of something that I regard as a difficult and sensitive subject matter, and a topic which I will only address under certain qualifying circumstances. So this was a question of, when will this person die? Now, that's a topic that we should, tread very carefully into it. And I'm reluctant to do that on most circumstances. It's certainly not a gratuitous kind of inquiry. This has got to be serious, and there have got to be good reasons why that person's wants to know, to give me good reasons why I want to do this for them. So here was my scenario. Many years ago in Montreal, I had a lady who was actually of Indian origin. She was born in Madras, I believe, but lived in Canada for many, many, many years and became a good friend and client. She had a brother in England who the doctor had diagnosed with a fatal disease. The doctor was vague about when that brother would die. My client asked me, when do you think he will die? And she said, the reason I got to know is because I'm of such an age, I cannot endure a 5-hour flight with, the condition of my legs. Let's say it was phlebitis or whatever, a lot poor circulation. She said, I can only make this trip once. I can't go now and just to see him and then go back 6 months later when they think he's going to die or whatever. I'd like to time this. I mean, she says, I don't expect exactitude, but I'd like to get it in a ballpark. So I would go within a month or weeks of his death and see him and spend a good amount of time with him and feel like it was good. So this was, I don't know what year, but the doctor said, he's got maybe a year to live or whatever. So I looked at her chart. I looked at the brother's chart because she had his birth time as well too. I employed Prashna as well too. Between the three of those, I said to her, I feel safe in believing that he is not in dire straits yet at this point. And this was like, let's say, late in 1 year, let's say November, December of a year. I said, I think you're good for first quarter, second quarter, maybe even third quarter of the next year. You don't need to worry about it. So in terms of thinking of a trip, I said, I think it's more like next fall. Why don't you leave it like that? Don't plan any trip at this point, and let's wait and see. Stay in touch with your brother and your other relatives there in England, see what's going to develop. What does the doctor say? So after time goes by in the summer, talk to the doctor again. Doctor says, I don't think he's going to live out the balance of the year. So this was now, let's say, September or something like that. So I said, okay, let's take another crack at it. So ask me the question, when will my brother die? Sort of like a fresh prashna. And then I sat down with all that again, and I don't recollect what I came up with, but let's say I said something like, first week of December. You better go in November for sure. You want to play it safe? Why don't you go for a month? Mid-November to mid-December. I'm sure that'll work out. Well, anyway, long story short, she followed my advice. She went. Her brother died something like, I don't know, December 10th or something like that. She got to see her brother, visited many times, got to see all of her other in-laws in England. There for her brother's death and funeral, and then wrapped it up, came home. So it was sort of like a success story and a proof of the analysis from 3 points of view, the querent, the subject of the querent, and two independent prashnas around timing. So I was pleased with that. I don't hold it up as a kind of a trophy because, it's a circumstance that I would rather not be addressing. And look, that's a success. I've had other scenarios where I have not succeeded to that degree. So, and it remains difficult, that kind of topic. And we need to be really experienced, I think, to get into that. Hart Defoe has said many times, there are no good young astrologers. And his point being that never mind how many books you've read, never mind how many courses you've taken, if you've not labored over hundreds, if not 1,000 horoscopes and seen the ebb and flow of your success or failures and your experience that in your aha moments and all the rest of it that you get from dealing with a lot of charts, not until then are you seasoned enough to really be able to deal with it in a thoroughly professional manner, getting outside your concerns for making the client happy. I mean, people come to you and they wring their hands in front of you and they say, my God, I've been single. I'm 40 years old. When am I going to get married? And I mean, your heart goes out and you think, well, there's this very attractive woman in front of me. How come she's not married? Why? And yet you look at the chart and say, ugh, I hate to tell you, but like, really, would you believe it? You're 40, but you're going to have to wait like another 7 years before you get into that dasha that is going to unlock all of your relationship potential. And the client is very unhappy and they go away mad. And 7 years later, they come back with an email, sometimes, and they say, boy, did I hate you that day. But you were right. I met this guy. We're engaged now. It seems like we're going to be married. And so when I hear these stories, it reminds me that Jyotish is powerful. It is, but as Hart would say too, Jyotish has teeth. And it can give you good news and it can give you bad news. And as an astrologer, you have to be like a doctor sometimes, get this x-ray in front of you and all these dark spots on the lungs. What are you going to say? Oh, it's just a bad x-ray. Don't worry about it. Well, sometimes you got to say, man, you've got cancer. So the responsibility on you is significant sometimes. And you need to have, your act together and really try to stay above the human concerns, because as much as you want to reward that client with good news, sometimes it's tough when you have to administer the bad news. And I think that's the hard part of being an astrologer in general. This is not a Tony Robbins seminar where if you just want it bad enough, you'll get it. You'll get it. Just keep on working, keep on praying. It's not like that. I mean, you can want as much as you want. That's a vasana. But what you're going to get is something else. It's like that line out of the Bhagavad Gita. You have every right to pursue that which you think is your purpose in life. But God is under no obligation to toss you a cookie at the end of your performance. That's a separate issue. That's karma. That's a hard one to get our heads around. But be as it may, that's the challenge that we as Jyotishis face on a regular basis.
Yeah. So I will just add to that part, Alan, which you are mentioning. There are times we talk about, and especially in the books of the Shastras, they always say, be a yogi. When you are trying to be an astrologer, and in the beginning it doesn't make much of a sense, like yogi is a different path and what we are talking about as an astrologer. But as we grow on this path and when we see the people coming and asking questions and what kind of expectation they have from us, it does make a lot of sense to be like not attached, at the same time giving them the knowledge what they need, how we are articulating the information to them. That itself becomes a big thing. How they're absorbing it. So as you also said, like talking about years of experience is really needed, and the in-depth knowledge should be there before you are in front of the client and trying to shape their life with the question which they're hearing with so much of faith in you. So given that, I understand the importance which you are talking about, and it's very hard for a beginner to not look into their chart and to be able to confuse, like where the life is going to be.
Exactly.
At the same time, you have to stop them, say you will be going in a wrong direction, wait for some more time, so that, and Penny Farrow, I remember, used to always say, 7 years. Okay, wait for 7 years before you can see your own chart. But the first basic one, you start to look into your own chart
It's true.
before you
Yeah.
really talk about. So, the request is coming that we do like to talk a lot about your book, the topic of the marriage and the harmony, and a lot of mentioned in your book. So, before we get into just a very quick, how the move had happened towards the Karma Yoga. So, just give us a little bit of the inspiration of writing this particular book, and you have always been a writer into a different area, and how that helped you. So go ahead and deep dive into the knowledge of the marriage and the harmony.
Yeah, well, there's a little story here just in terms of my experience as a writer. I started somewheres shortly after university writing. Well, actually, I started in university trying to write novels. I can't tell you how many novels were burned in the woods or buried somewheres or thrown in a river. Or just simply went into the garbage can. But ultimately, I did publish my first novel when I was in my late 20s, I guess. I used to like mystery thriller novels. That was the thing that animated me. It's what I like to read, and it's what I like to write. And I did that for many years, and I've actually lost track of how many novels I've published, something like 10 or 12 or something like that. The ones that I'm most proud of are my new age noir novels, which are basically centered on a protagonist who is like, for me, it was based on Hart Defoe. I was sitting in his classes, and I think, wow, what if Hart Defoe was a private investigator, and he could use all these techniques like nimitta, astrology, hasta, everything, numerology, in his case analysis. So I ended up writing these three books: Scorpio Rising, Felonious Monk, Soma County. Soma County actually. Quite a bit of action takes place in California, but a lot of it in India as well too. Anyway, those three books I'm the most proud of, and they've got a lot of Vedic knowledge woven into them, in the form of Jyotish, Hasta, Nimitta, etc. I'm most proud of those. I mean, if anything, I'd like to be, as far as novels, I'd like to be remembered for those. So anyone who likes astrology and likes mystery, they're perfect novels. But as years went by, I mean, the whole thing around publishing novels, it's a difficult business, and publishers were dying by the wayside. Agents were, quitting their business because, it was a sort of a dying field. Because frankly, people don't read like they used to. When I was a kid, we had a house full of books. My parents read books, my brother and I read books. We grew up reading books, and I still read books. But modern generation, I mean, it's the cell phone in the hand. They'd rather watch a little video on YouTube. They'd rather watch TikTok. They'd rather look at Instagram and Facebook. Yes, some people still read, but fewer and fewer and fewer. So the publishing industry is kind of dying. So around about 7 years ago, while Hart's guru Mantraji was still alive, and I used to spend a lot of time with him. Basically, I functioned as his chauffeur in many respects and took him everywhere that he needed to go in Toronto, and used to go to all of his satsangs, like 3 or 4 a week, in addition. And it was bugging me. At one point, I asked him, like, is writing a worthwhile? Is it a noble profession? Is it a right profession for anyone, but specifically for me? And he said, well, writing is good and fiction is, creative. So you're being, sort of temporarily godlike, and that's a great exercise of your buddhi. But he said, you are, as far as a Jyotishi, you are now paka. You're ready and you're practicing. You've studied with Hart. You've had years of experience. You're seeing clients. He said, you should write about Jyotish. You combine your two loves. And I said, whoa, Mantraji, my opinion is that everything has already been written about Jyotish, and I have nothing to add. I know what I know, but that's only what, I've learned from Hart. And he said, no. He said, like, your own experience and your own perspective and your writing skills. He says, you should start writing about Jyotish. And I said, well, I can't see a book. He said, start small. He says, write an article. He said, you have a website? I said, write an article for your website, then write another article, then write another article. So I said, okay, I commit myself to following your direction. So I started writing an article every month without fail for my website. After a while, I've got like, I don't know, let's say 24 articles. I packaged that in a little book, Stellar Astrology, Volume 1. And I continue writing articles. After a while, I'm thinking, well, I wrote a thesis for ACFA many years ago on Parivartana Yoga. The requirement for ACFA Diploma Level 2 certification was a 10,000 word thesis. I went overboard, as I typically do when I'm writing. I wrote a 30,000 word thesis. Okay, that was sitting in my drawer, and I realized, oh my God, I've got this. 30,000 words is not a book, but if I flesh it out, add more philosophy, more sort of Jyotish background, do my case studies, flesh them out to a greater degree, I could have a book. So I did that, and I ended up with like, I don't know what, 65,000 words or whatever, published that as a book, Parivartana Yoga. Oh, incidentally, it reminds me, I think, for readers in India who are interested, keep an eye on Amazon. I mean, Amazon India version. There's going to be a special on that book, Parivartana Yoga, for just sometime in the month of May. It may have started already, or it's coming. It's definitely happening in May. I just got a notice from Amazon a while ago that they are going forward with that. It'll be a significant discount. I mean, I'm not sure, like 30%, 50% off for the book in the Indian market only. Parivartana Yoga only in India. Anyway, so that book, I mean, was, 4 out of 10 people, 4 out of 10 horoscopes have a Parivartana in the horoscope. It's such a useful reference book. And I've had lots of feedback from people how they value that book. So basically, after writing that, I realized, okay, that was, I got into that. I found a subject matter that was interesting, and I wrote it, and I've enjoyed some success with it. So I racked my brain. What else could I write about? Like, I'm going back to what I said to Mantraji. I think everything's been written. And he said, no. Just, you need to think of it. So I thought of it, and I thought, Kala Sarpa. There's scarcely nothing written about it, nothing at all. So I do my research. I start collecting horoscopes. I start off with maybe 20 horoscopes. After a while, between my own clients and famous people, I've got 600 horoscopes, Kala Sarpas. And I do sort of analysis on that. And lots of insights come out of that. I write up, the whole background, the case studies, and end up with another book. Wow. Okay. So this is fun. And the thing is, I'm learning at the same time. This is so much better than writing novels, where I'm living in an imaginary world, creating imaginary people. Meanwhile, what I'm trying to write as a novelist is like being in a dream. When my wife opens my office door and says, "What do you feel like for lunch?" I go, leave me alone. I'm writing. And I don't want to be bothered because it's like being interrupted from a dream, and it's hard to get back into it. When I'm writing Jyotish, it's different. It's like doing a how-to manual. You take the leg and you screw it into the socket, and that's one leg on the table. It's like assembling an IKEA table. You can be interrupted with a phone call or lunch or whatever, and you can go right back and pick up where you left off. In terms of the writing process, I'm a nicer person just by writing about Jyotish instead of the imaginary world that demands that I be in a dream undisturbed. And the other beautiful thing is, I'm learning all the time too. So I'm learning as I write, and I'm writing in order to teach other people at the same time. So, with Kama Yoga, this latest book, I mean, this is the information, the technique is courtesy of Hart Defoe, who taught this sort of, technique around passion combinations in the horoscope for, throughout his last, decade or two. In his intermediate course, the advanced course. And so I took the core of that and I, fleshed it out to a significant degree, talking about culture of marriage and divorce and the phenomena of single people in the modern world. Worked in, all the Vedic philosophy, that's involved in all this, which is, we are driven by our vasanas, which can be read through the disposition of the grahas in the horoscope, but the results that we get in our life is determined by karma, and that is a different process. That is bhava vichara, not graha vichara. So I worked all that in and developed these protocols, to a significant degree of detail. I used like 100 different horoscopes for examples to make sure that people really got it. And then, I wrote a lot of case studies. Originally, I had 60 case studies. I ended up removing 12 of them because they're all like living persons. Let's say Lindsay Lohan, Tiger Woods. So I thought, well, in a litigious America, I'm going to take all these living subjects out of the book and set them aside. Not that I know anything about their personal lives that isn't already on the internet, but I just thought I got enough already. So I ended up with 48 case studies. So it's a very very rich book in terms of a thorough delineation of the analysis that you must go through in order to satisfy that question. I jokingly say this book is like everything you wanted to know about love and sex, but were afraid to ask your astrologer. But all joking aside, when clients come to see you, and I've always said this to my students, look, there are two things that you've got to master or try to master in your practice of Jyotish. That is the analysis of relationships and the analysis of career, because 90% of the time, that is why people are coming to see you. If you can do that pretty much consistently, you will continue to have clients in a good business on that score alone. Yes, people will come to you for health and medical reasons, for spiritual reasons, about creativity, about financial investments, but again and again and again and again, it's about relationships and career. So this book is dedicated to a really deep plunge into the whole topic of relationships. And again, what an interesting phenomenon. I mean, I gathered up, 200 horoscopes to study, that were sort of preeminent, potential examples, and ended up using like 100 of them in the book and 48 case studies. I learned a lot too, because even this whole concept and the techniques that Hart had taught, I felt like I had not really absorbed it ever since I learned it. And I had sort of scant kind of grasp of it. And I felt I hadn't really mastered it. But, and actually that was my incentive to write this book, because I said, this is such a huge chunk of knowledge. I've got to make it mine. And I can only make it mine by rereading all my class notes and going into all the examples and looking for more examples and doing analysis on all these examples to find commonalities. And so the result of all my books, it seems to be, is starting with a core of solid technique, and again, courtesy Hart Defoe, and then being able to expand that through, philosophy, psychology, and analysis, a kind of a crude form of statistics, if you like. I have learned so much more just for my own practice. And now, in the form of a book, I hope that it can help many other people as well, too.
Yeah. I do like to ask the questions like when you are deciding about the topics which needs to be covered in a book, especially a vast topic like, love, marriage, partnership, consultation, the timing of the marriage, turbulence. And, as we are talking about, our Jyotish conference is going to be dedicating pretty much all 11 days. We are talking from all different angles. Few special topic will always be there, but, it's a vast topic. So how did you decide about the topics which you should be covering in this particular book?
Well, as I say, you have some sort of core techniques in mind that, let's say, you use as a practicing Jyotishi, and then, I mean, for a foolish understanding of that, you want to have an understanding. Let's say in the case of relationships, you want to have an understanding of cultural differences. For instance, I mean, the whole attitude towards love, courting, marriage, sexuality is quite different in North America as opposed to India, as opposed to Japan, as opposed to Saudi Arabia, as opposed to South America. There are all these cultural variances, which we need to take a sort of a broad look at all of this and to understand what is human nature. to be attracted. The bonding and mating instinct is there in the species. Otherwise, we would die off. I mean, we're hardwired to do it ultimately, to mate. But the personal variances are huge. I mean, some people are serial philanderers. Other people are relationship phobic. And so why? We need to understand that. There's the psychology of individuals, which is reflected, both in an understanding of human nature and human psychology, but then the specifics are there in the horoscope as well. Overall, that there are universal principles, let's say in Vedic philosophy, the notion of experience. Every experience creates samskaras of commonality that reach a critical mass, form vasanas. Then those become sort of grooves in our behavioral patterns that we, repeat. It's like the little monkey keeps hitting the bar, because each time he hits a little press bar, a cherry drops out of the chute. So we become conditioned by our experience, seeking to experience something or seeking to avoid something. So there's a kind of a conditioning that happens there. This is part of the Vedic philosophy of human behavior. There's the sort of the noble goals of a life, the Purusharthas, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. These are all, themes that play out at certain phases in life, and also within certain, psychological types have a greater bias for one thing or another. And it's important to sort of provide a broad context so that we understand human nature and the variances, in which people operate, both culturally, in familial units, and as individuals. And so this, it obliged me, to sort of dig deep into, cultural sort of backgrounds, Vedic philosophy. Frankly, I struggled with some of this, and I had to do a lot of reading. I had to touch base with some of my peers and associates in the larger Sangha of Hart Defoe's student body. My associates over the years, whose opinion I trust, and I had to solicit their help for some of this. And then the rest of it is, as I say, with every course I've taken, I was always impressed with Hart's ability to provide multiple examples of a theme or a technique or whatever. And, I wanted to follow that. So for every single principle I presented, I wanted to have like 3 example charts so that it didn't seem fluky that, this technique worked with just that chart. I wanted to show multiple charts, would abide by this. So that's what obliged me to have so many horoscopic examples in the chart. And I mean, and then once you start doing that, and then get into case studies so that you can, each principle that you present, may be epitomized by one chart. But then in the end, if you have like 7 principles or more, a dozen principles, let's say, because I went on to sort of, define certain yogas as being sort of sexually inclined, let's say. Now, this was something Hart did not do in his passion program. It was something that arose out of my own research. And I think that's the value of doing research. You think it's all been, done already, but unless you sort of bring your own inquiring eye to it with a, a critical mass of horoscopes, you actually don't know what you might discover. And this is, for me, the exciting part and the motivating part too. Like I spent 2 years working on this particular book. I thought I was going to do it in a year, but I got into so much, I'll call it research, that it just, I went deep, and it took a while. And I'm a very fastidious writer too. I put this book through, God, I don't know, 5-7 drafts, something like that. So, I like it, have all the T's crossed and the I's dotted. And in the end, it ends up being like quite a rich experience for me to have written. And the feedback I'm getting so far is that people are, quite happy and think that this is, quite a substantive book. So so far so good, and more to come. This just whets my appetite for more sort of deep penetration of other key topics in life. So, I mean, and there's a number of those. It's just a question of which one will I tackle next.
Lovely. Just if I do a little bit of deep dive into the book, do you like to share some wisdom from your side? Because we have astrologers in the background, you want to know from their side, you know, what do you think should be the reason for a marriage in harmony? And what do you think there are, like, whatever you'd like to share, that also give them a more interest towards going and, getting more knowledge in terms of detailed knowledge from the book?
Okay, well, let's try to do double duty here, and at the same time, let's try to plug, promote the two lectures that I'll be giving, at our Shivaji Gurukulam next month, because they are topics that are taken from this book, and so I can kind of answer that question at the same time. So one of my topics is the very subject of vis-a-vis marriage. Is the client or the subject inclined for marriage, eager for marriage, or are they reluctant? I mean, this is a very key thing, because with a client asking that question, you need to be able to sort it out whether they indeed want a relationship or, are very ambivalent about it, less inclined to do so. So, for instance, inclination in the chart is always seen with some engagement or linkage between the moon and Venus with a critical aspect of the horoscope, the first house itself or the first lord, for instance. So if you have a moon or Venus ruling the first house or occupying the first house or aspecting the first house, it creates a kind of a disposition for romanticism. Why? Because I call the moon and Venus the good girls of the zodiac. The moon is empathetic, emotional, and nurturing, kind of like a mother-like quality. And as far as Venus, Venus is romantic. Venus is aesthetic, artistic, and sensual. And so when you combine those two, it creates in the horoscope a kind of a romantic disposition for that person. And whether it's a man or a woman, it doesn't matter because men can be emotional, they can be nurturing, they can be romantic, they can be sensual. All of that's in place. So when Moon and Venus play an outsized role in influencing these major points in the horoscope, the individual is inclined. Look, I'm making it seem simple because there are caveats. What if Saturn is squashing those two planets at the same time? Well, that's going to change the notion of what's going on. As a contrast, we look at Mercury and Saturn vis-a-vis relationship, and we say, well, Mercury, if we personify Mercury, we think of Mercury as an adolescent, somebody who's kind of young, and they haven't got their mind made up yet. They may be kind of twitchy and ambivalent and uncertain what they're doing. That's not a good candidate for marriage. Meanwhile, Saturn, if we personify it, Saturn is old and cold and distant and like lacking energy, and cynical. I mean, could go on and on with adjectives, right? Word association with Saturn. But the prognosis for that, if Mercury and Saturn are attached to some critical points in the horoscope, if they occupy or aspect or rule the ascendant, then the person's kind of like, yeah, marriage, yeah, maybe good, maybe not so good. I don't know. I'll think about it. and then they're not eager for that. That may be the commitment phobic type. I don't want to be married. So there's the contrast: Moon and Venus versus Mercury and Saturn, just in terms of being inclined for a relationship. Then you've got sort of passionate types. Moon and Mars are usually the animating forces there. Moon for the emotions, and Mars because Mars likes adventure. And Mars can be aggressive and passionate. And so if you get Moon and Mars, again, it's a similar protocol. If Moon and Mars are influencing the ascendant Lord, or each other, passion comes forward, and then people are ready to engage. And then, there's this notion of foreignness. So in a horoscope, what do we use as flags for or indicators for foreigners? Typically, Saturn indicates foreigners, and Rahu Ketu indicate foreigners as well too. So if in a horoscope, if you've got Saturn ruling the first house, or occupying or aspecting the first house, or the seventh for that matter, and likewise if Rahu Ketu run through the 1-7 axis, or the ascendant lord or the seventh lord lies on the Rahu axis, Rahu Ketu axis, or is aspected by Saturn. Basically, Saturnian or a nodal influence upon some key factor in the chart, first house, seventh house, and their lords, then that will create a bit of that bias for what we call a stranger relationship. Now, in the old days, a small town village astrologer in India might say, you're going to marry somebody outside the village. That's maybe not a good thing. We don't know their caste. We don't know, their religion. We don't know the family history in terms of finances and behavior. Yeah, all this sort of stuff. Now, in Western culture, in modern times, we're much more, liberal about that. Like, if you fall in love with, somebody of a different ethnicity, that's okay. Society condones that, supports it. I mean, same goes for same-sex relationship as well too. Great disparities in age. You can marry somebody 20 years older than you or younger than you. That's okay. Society allows it so long as the person's legal age. But when you bring that person home to meet your mom and dad, it's like, whoops, okay. I didn't know you were gay and that you've got, boyfriend, girlfriend that are of a different ethnicity. Society says there's nothing wrong with that, but, vis-a-vis the family of traditional values, or even your circle of friends for that matter, or your social circle, there's the foreign element, which is indicated, flagged by Saturn or Rahu Ketu in the horoscope. And again, I must stress, we as astrologers make no judgment upon that. You go where love takes you, and that's good. We understand it, and that's the way it should be for you to be happy. Follow your heart. But we are trying to recognize this in the horoscope too, to help the client to say, you know what, it's okay if you want to do that. This is the grain in your piece of wood. Right? This is the path to follow. You want to cut this piece of wood, you cut with the grain, it's easier. There'll be less conflict internally, externally. You're following your true path. And so when we do all this, and sometimes, somebody's pressured to get married, and we look at their horoscope and we say, like, you've got no inclination to get married. I mean, you need to push back at your parents and say, leave me alone. I am not the marrying type. And I mean, I know that's hard in some cultures. If you're I live in Toronto. There's a large Indian population here, so I have a lot of clients from that demographic, and many 30-year-old, 35-year-old Indian Hindu woman in kind of despair, like, my parents are on my case night and day. When are you going to get married? Because now that you're 30, you're like milk going bad in the fridge, right? So, and sometimes I have to say, it's okay. It's just not your disposition. And if you have to tell your parents this, say your astrologer has said vis-a-vis your horoscope that this is your path and they have to accept that. I mean, I'll take the blame for it if it comes to that, because there are reasons for that. That's your karma. That's your vasana. Those are your vasanas. That's your karma. And sometimes it relieves the person hugely. Whew, okay, I don't need to sweat this anymore, because what I'm thinking, am I crazy? Am I the weird one that I don't want to, go along this path? So, Jyotish can be quite enabling in that respect. So there is one of my lectures, the first of my lectures is just on this topic. Is the individual inclined, eager for marriage, or disinclined, reluctant? Furthermore, in the going forward in marriage, will they sort of follow the love marriage path, fall in love with someone regardless of who their parents choose? Or will they even go so far as to, let's say, violate the norms of their culture, their social circle, their family, and, engage in some other relationship, which is, considered sort of forbidden, marrying a foreigner or someone of same-sex disposition? That's one of those lectures. The other lecture is about basically, okay, so in the previous lecture, it's really all driven by vasanas, the analysis of the planets, so graha vichara, to determine our vasanas for that inclination, disinclination, passion, and foreign quality. The second lecture is more about karma, and that is now having put your foot into the pool of marriage, will you experience peace or war, harmony or conflict? And in that, will you enjoy a long-term monogamous relationship, or you will divorce never to marry again, or will you divorce and remarry right away, and divorce again and remarry right away, and become a kind of a serial monogamist and experience multiple relationships over the course of your life? That is all about karma, and karma is seen through bhava vichara. And there we really drill into the seventh house. You know, what planets are in and ruling and influencing by aspect the seventh bhava and the seventh lord. What planet is it? Has it gone to a positive or negative house? Is it in strong or weak avasta? Is it supported, stabilized by benefics, or is it destabilized by malefics? And then lastly, when we're talking about relationship, it's always about the house lord, the bhava lord, seventh house lord, the seventh bhava itself, and the karaka Venus. Is Venus weak or strong by avasta? Is it well placed by bhava, positive or negative? And is it afflicted or supported by benefics versus malefics? That's the protocol, you know, kind of a generic protocol for bhava vichara. But we drill deeply into that vis-a-vis, you know, whether the person will experience good times or bad times, you know, and so it's the influence predominantly of benefics versus malefics upon the house and its lord, and whether that house is weak or strong or well placed. That gives us some indication of all that peace versus war. Then vis-a-vis the multiplicity factor, when you have dual signs rising, you know, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, or Pisces, there is always some degree of ambivalence around relationship. It's not 100%, but, you know, the condition can arise. Then, you know, the planets Mercury and Jupiter, the lords of those dual rashis, the Dvishvabhava rashis, Mercury and Jupiter are cerebral. They're not passionate planets, so they're more critical. You know, Mercury is the adolescent. Jupiter is, you know, the ponderous sort of like, is this the right thing to do? And so those planets are not big on passion. They're more about like, oh, so let me sample a bit of this, move on, sample a bit of that. So that leads more to multiple relationships. If there's a lot of water influence in the chart, the Kita Rashis, so, you know, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces, if those signs are found in the first or seventh house, if the lords of the first or seventh are found in those signs, if all of your planets are in water Rashis, there's this notion of multiplicity, because Kita, you know, sort of indicates vermin, which multiply, you know, wildly and at random. And so that implies something of this, you know, multiple relationships. So there's that whole thing. And again, which is useful for, sometimes you see a client, and I'll say this many a time, I'll say, look, you know, you're at that age now, you know, you're inclined for marriage, but, you know, you've got let's say Virgo rising, and you've got Pisces on the seventh house, and you've got Moon in the seventh house as well. Moon and Pisces in the seventh house. And I'll say, you know, like, and your Mercury is, you know, maybe not in one of the negative houses. So I'll say, you know, you're not really, you know, inclined to get into a relationship. It can be kind of tough for you, and you may not last long in either. So you need to, I hate to use these words, but sort of grow up a little bit. So like, don't be rushing into this. Like you're 30 now, you know, wait a while, wait, you know, date, get experience, you know, get to know what it is that you like or do not like, and let a little time pass. First, just for a simple maturity, but also to maybe sometimes waiting for a dasha or bhukti that is more promising. So these are things I'll talk about in lecture 2. Either of which are both very valuable in any kind of consultation going forward for anybody who attends this program. They'll be able to use this like the next time they have a client who's, you know, considering, you know, a marital prospect of some kind. And so this, I go into this in a lot of detail in the book as well too. But the two lectures at Arshavija will provide, the highlights of that and the sort of essentials that you need to know in order to go forward. And we'll have enough time to have sufficient horoscopic examples to make these principles clear too.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen, for explaining. I will just add to this that Ellen is going to speak on Thursday and Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern on the topics which we talked about Thursday and the Friday. And as also in the Jyotish Mela, looking into the attraction, we are seeing majority of our speakers are going to be in person in Ashtravidya Gurukulam between June 6th till 11th. So you will also see some speakers like Dr. Charak and Sam GP and the Mikhail and the Michael Sugarman will be available even before 6. But the rest of it and all of them being available is going to be between 6 to 11. So, you choose your time when you want to come. The whole conference is open for you to be able to attend either online or in person, or we say a word hybrid, like, come or go. However, given this 11 days, and what situation you are into, you are working, cannot take the off, so you can utilize that. Just wanted to very quickly ask you, Ellen, about you. How was your experience with Ashtravidya Gurukulam? That's one of the things people always ask about. So, why do you think you should be recommending people to come in person in Ashtravidya Gurukulam?
Well, I think that personal contact with teachers is, so important. I mean, it's a form of darshan, right? But we can attend if we have no choice but to attend, virtually in the world of Zoom. But personal contact, Hart used to say, I hope I get it right, we learn in four different ways. We learn from our teachers, we learn from Shastra, we learn from our fellow students, and we learn from our own personal experience in working with horoscopes. And I think the beauty of an in-person conference is that we can meet teachers, we can be in their presence, we can hear their direct words, we can ask them questions, but we also sit with and commune with our fellow students in between classes or lectures. And we get to experience some of their insights as well too, and all of this is it makes for a very rich experience. On that score, just while I've got the mic, I just looked at the chat line and I see that Sorab had asked a question earlier about my personal experience with Mantraji here in Toronto. So yes, I did have personal contact with him for roughly about 10 years. In fact, he was the reason that I moved from Montreal to Toronto. I used to see him regularly. When I first started coming to Toronto, I went to this yoga studio where he would give a regular Friday night lecture. And I would come up to Toronto once every month to see clients Friday, maybe one on Friday afternoon, one or two on Friday afternoon, and then a full day of clients on Saturday and a few on Sunday. But I would always go to Mantraji's satsang on Friday night. And sometimes there'd only be a couple of people there. A couple of times I went and there was only me. He would show up regularly because that was his, his role. Like the sun rose every morning, he would be there waiting for whoever came. So we had some pretty deep conversations. And then and then he always used to say to me, you should move to Toronto, you should move to Toronto, you should move to Toronto, like it was his mantra. And I'm joking, of course, but his words sunk into my heart. And I wanted to be closer to him and exposed to him, more. So eventually I pulled up roots in Montreal. I mean, talk about, property, work and family and social life, and left it all behind to move here. And I started going to his satsangs 3 or 4 nights a week. And after a while, I started, driving him to wherever he needed to go and absorbing, his presence. And again, he's probably, between him and Hart, huge influences in my life in determining my dedication to Jyotish. And I'm ever grateful for the two of them. Of course, Mantraji, he himself was told by his guru to leave India. He was a big astrologer in Delhi, and his astrologer, his guru, told him, you must leave India, you must go to North America, where you will find a worthy student to whom you will teach Jyotish, and who will in turn teach Jyotish in the Western world. And he followed his guru's advice and ended up, because one of his clients was the ambassador to the Canadian ambassador to India. And the ambassador said, well, you know, if you want to go to Canada, that's an easy one. I can get you a visa next week. And so rather than think of America, he said, okay, Canada's good. And so he came to Canada, and he, speaking not a word of English or very little, and entered into the Indian community here in Toronto, and became renowned very quickly because he was such a master Jyotishi. And he kept looking around for, where's the special student I'm supposed to meet? Where? And he kept looking for him, you know, all these people he was meeting. But every young man or woman that he met, they all wanted to be doctors, lawyers, engineers. This is why their families had immigrated to Canada, to enjoy a better life. Nobody wanted to be a Jyotishi. There's no money in that. And finally, they met. My teacher, Hart Defoe, and his guru, Mantraji. They met. They both found each other, both having followed, let's say, direction from above, from on high. I won't go into how Hart did it, but he had to do substantive things. Think of it as upayas, an act of faith, in order to find his guru. Eventually, they found each other, and there began, you know, a relationship, a one-on-one guru-shishya Shastra relationship of almost 15 years. And then Hart embarked upon, you know, his significant teachings. I mean, he'd been seeing a lot of clients up to then. And then he, I'll use the term, initiated so many of us, Penny Farrell, Stephen Heiberger, myself, and many others, too numerous to name, quite frankly. And that's, I thank them daily. In every lecture I give in a public venue, I display their faces, their pictures at the outset of my lectures, because without them, I would not be here.
Great. Thanks a lot, Alan, for sharing and also emphasizing on the point which you talked about, meeting in person. You make such a great relation with people, and that lives with you for years to come. So I remember attending the lecture with Penny, and all of them became my friend, and, you know, want to have those times where you really want to see and sit in front of your teacher and be able to learn.
Yes.
As compared to that, Zoom does give us convenience, as we talked about, while, you know, nothing can replace the part which you're talking about. So thanks a lot for re-emphasizing on that one. And we would like to open up for the questions for people. They are waiting in the background. So Ajit ji, you have been really waiting on. If you want, you can get started. So we are here to just take all of your questions. You can unmute yourself and start to ask. So Ajit ji, I will start with you.
Okay, thank you. This is Ajit Gokhale in California. The question I have is, particularly in South India, Kuja dosha is looked upon, and the Navamsha is looked upon more carefully than perhaps in North India. What is your view of that? That's first question. And if you do look at Kuja dosha, do you only look at it from the D1 chart or also the D9 chart? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Ajit, for the question. So Kuja dosha, you know, if you do the math, it's a very common incidence, right? Because the standard definition for Kuja dosha is if Mars is found in the first, second, fourth, seventh, eighth, or 12th from the ascendant. So that's six houses out of 12. So chances are, from the perspective of the Lagna, Mars will be in one of those 6 problematic houses. So that's a 50-50 proposition. But, you know, Hart, my teacher, Hart Defoe, has always stressed, don't stop there. You must look at Kuja dosha from 3 perspectives. So the other perspective is, look at Chandra Lagna, and from the perspective of the moon, is Mars in one of those critical places, 1, 2, 4, 7, 8, or 12. But that again is another 50-50 proposition. And then because it's relationships that we're talking about, do the same all again from the perspective of treating Venus as your focal point. Is Mars found in 1, 2, 4, 7, 8, or 12 from Venus? And again, that is a 50-50 proposition. But Hart says you should do all three. And so now you've got a mathematical sort of proposition. Doing it from the Lugna is a 50-50, 1 in 2 chances. Doing it from the moon is a 1 in 2 chance. Doing it from Venus is a 1 in 2 chance. If you do the math there, hitting all three, the trifecta, that's a 1 in 8 chance. So Hart would say, like, don't get excited unless you see Kuja dosha from all 3 points of view. Now we're down to, instead of a 50-50 proposition, it's a 1 in 12.5% proposition. So when I see that, I mean, I always look for it routinely, every chart. If I see that, then I will get excited or concerned, as the case may be. But the other thing I'm always mindful of is, how old is this person? Because, you know, many Shastra will say Kuja dosha is an affliction that lasts, you know, up until age 28 or 30. After that, the rough edges in your personality, your partner's personality, are worn off a bit, and things are smoother going. So always keep that in mind, and think of Kuja dosha as more of a, you know, younger person's phenomenon, you know, when we're active, energetic, et cetera, et cetera. Do I look at it in the Navamsha? No. Using the Navamsha, I tend to use it in the way that Hart has instructed us, within the context of Dasha Bhukti Vichara. So to keep that real simple, you know, the moon and Mars are the players in a Kuja dosha, or specifically Mars. So if the person has a trifold Kuja dosha, 3-way Kuja dosha, and they are now running Mars dasha, and Mars is in a negative house in the D9, then my little antenna are going to go up, and I'm going to say, well, this is maybe now a timely topic for concern, because they are of the age, they're in the dasha, the life period, and they've got the condition in their horoscope that warrants some analysis. That's my answer on that. So typically, I'm not using the D9 too much, except for the timing element.
Thank you for your detailed answer. Just one follow-up and final follow-up. There is sort of an urban legend that the famous astrologer K.N. Rao in Delhi, and his mother, who was a very prominent astrologer, had in his D9 Mars in the first house. And therefore, his mother advised him not to marry. And he didn't marry and remained a bachelor. So do you believe in, or do you ascribe to the view that, yes, Mars in 2nd, 4th, 7, 8, etc. is there, but some of the 1st and 7th are the higher grade Kuja doshas, like many people in the South believe, particularly Gayatri Devi, Vasudev, and so forth. You subscribe to any of this?
Well, you know, just vis-a-vis K.N. Rao's chart, I guess I would have to see that D9 to say, perhaps, hopefully, to understand why she said that. Because, you know, if Mars was in the first house in the D9, and it was in strength, let's say in Aries, Scorpio, or Capricorn, that's a very powerful position. And if K.N. Rao was on the verge of his Mars dasha, you know, many an astrologer would say Mars dasha is the one in which you will get married, because it's powerful and well placed in the D9. Now, the D9 is never wholly independent from the Rashi. I mean, if Mars is the 7th lord debilitated in the 6th house in the Rashi, I'm not going to be advising marriage, except it would end in divorce. You know, so it's none of this can be used independently. I mean, vis-a-vis any of the amshas, I don't think you should interpret. You should not rest all your weight on an amsha without close corroboration or consideration of what you're seeing in the D1. So without knowing what that chart looks like, I wouldn't understand her rationale for that and would be hesitant to apply it, carte blanche to every other horoscope of a client who happens to have Mars in the first house of the D9. So, as they like to say, the devil is in the details, but I'd want to see those details.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good
Umesh,
question.
you can go ahead with the question.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Hi, Alan. This is Umesh. So I also have a two-part question.
Yeah.
The first part is, in this era of multiple marriages and multiple partners, which houses do you see for the second and third? Some people look at the ninth house and some people look at the second house. So that's the first part. The second part is, how do you tell, what techniques you use to tell about the characteristics of a future spouse or partner, either in the Navamsha or in the Rashi chart?
Yeah, okay. So first part, marriage itself, the first initial marriage, of course, we all know it's the seventh house. There's a lot of opinion on what happens after that, but the common opinion, and I'm going to defer almost entirely to my teacher, Hart Defoe, who says that the second marriage is found in the second house. The rationale for that is, in fact, I talk about this in lecture 2 that I will be giving, because if you have a lot of planets in the second house, this can be a signature for a very strong bias for divorce and remarriage. Here's why. From the perspective of the seventh house, the second is 8 houses away. So the death of a marriage, yes, it could be as a consequence of spousal death, but often in modern times and in youth and good health, whatever, the death of marriage one is because you've fallen in love with or become intimate with another person. And that activity or relationship is the death of marriage number one. So marriage number one is seventh house. Its death or longevity is house 2. And so we see the prospects for second marriage in house 2. You can go on with that, the same logic. If the second house is marriage number 2, where is its death or longevity? That would be 8 houses away. That would take us to the 9th, which you alluded to earlier. And so the 9th will be the indicator of marriage, the death of marriage number 2, and therefore the birth or instigation of marriage 3. And you can go continue around the chart like that. It's a bit like Bhavat Bhavam, a similar kind of logic. That's my answer to that one. The second one was, concerning the amshas. Oh yes, the nature of the spouse.
Right.
I would restrict myself to the Rashi itself and the seventh house. In the normal things, the Lord, especially the Lord of the seventh house, the planets that occupy the seventh. And it's like Bhava Vichara and Venus, which is going to be the indicator for the spouse. I would not use the D9 for that. And again, I'm following in line with Hart's advice, which is not to use the amshas as little mini rashis, not to use them as a miniature version of the D1. It's a separate matter. His use of that very much subscribes to Sheshadri Iyer's protocol, which is we use the amshas as a timing technique for the subject matter that is related to the amsha in question. So you use the D9 and the disposition of planets in the D9 to determine when will relationship go well or poorly, not for reading the character of the spouse. Now, that's the thinking of Sheshadri Iyer, Mantraji, and Hart Defoe. Other people, as we know, learn from different gurus, study different shastra, have their own experience. We can do nothing other but respect their insight and their experience, and these things may work. I always defer to my betters. And that's immediately Heart Defoe, and secondarily, and I could say primarily Mantraji, who taught him everything he knew.
Yeah. So just a quick follow-up to the first one. So when we say the second house is for subsequent marriages, now is that a matter of Desh Kal Patra, where in the ancient India, like the marriage ended because of the death of the spouse? So that would make absolute physical sense. But nowadays it's just a matter of desire. So that second house thing doesn't hold as much.
But it's still, I know in one case, in the initial case, it's like it's out of your hands and it's your passive reaction. Oh, well, I've lost my spouse, and so I'm allowed to have another one now. And so you're a passive actor in that, that you go ahead. In modern times, it's like you become unhappy, and then you proactively say, I'm going to look around for somebody who's better. And then, you create a situation where divorce is necessary, and then you get the other spouse that you want or deserve or whatever, and move on from there. So, I mean, it's, times change, and it's a cultural sort of matter as well, too. And changing times, both are of an influence too. And we have to evolve with time as well, too. What used to be, sort of cut and dried and simple, back in the old days, you can't have sex until you get married, for instance. But I mean, in modern times, in more liberal societies, I mean, that's no longer a stricture for many.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So we are already 8 past our 90 minutes time. So Alan, do you want to take any further question, or should we?
Oh, I'm
close it for the
okay
day?
for time. I mean, that's up to you.
Okay. So do anybody has any burning question? We can take one more question for Alan. I am not seeing much of a question coming. If not, we would like to close the session because it's getting past. And just like to remind everyone that if you are coming for full conference, this is the time to enroll before 15th May. We are encouraging people to come in person. We are giving credits. We are giving additional coupons for you to be able to come for the full conference in Ashravidya. While you can always keep it hybrid, like if you cannot come for all day, try to come for few days, and some of the time be from the online, we do arrangements for that. So and all the information you can go to jyotish.com, and I've also put the link in the chat for you to look. So if there is no further question, I would like to thank Alan for your time, for a lot of wisdom, and looking forward to see you again, Alan, in Ashravidya Gurukulam. And so see you soon, and again interacting with all the your colleagues, professionals over there. So let's see to see everyone in the conference too. So any question, do reach out to me or contact us on jyotish.com, and we'll do our closing mantra and we'll close the session.
Lovely. Thank you all.
Om Purnamidah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudakshate Purnascha Purnamadai Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om. Shri Guru Harihi Om. Thank you everyone for joining, and you have rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you, Ella.
Okay.